Excellent. Well, welcome everyone. This is the fourth in our four-part series at the Michigan Center for Student Success on Pathways, Programs, and Possibilities, the next guided pathways frontier in Michigan. And we're delighted to see you here this afternoon. I'm Katie Giardello, and I am joined by my esteemed colleagues, Erica Oriens and Jenny Schenker. I'm not sure that Precious was able to join us today, but I'm glad to have Erica and Jenny with us. We make up the Michigan Center for Student Success, as most of you know. And we are joined today by two guest presenters. John Iuzzini from Achieving the Dream is joined by Dr. Stephanie Whalen, who is the Faculty Chair, Academy for Teaching Excellence at Harper College. And they're going to be presenting and sharing some great ideas on empowering faculty to promote equitable participation in academic and workforce programs. We named these sessions several months ago, and now that I'm repeating them, I'm realizing what a mouthful they are, the titles that we developed. However, they are descriptive, and that truly is what we will be discussing today. I think all of you will enjoy the opportunity to hear from both presenters and also hear more from Achieving the Dream on a new toolkit that they have developed and released for colleges to begin using. If you've been with us before, you know that we frequently will ask you to find your name in the participant list or up in the corner of your little video box and click the three buttons that offer you several options, including the one to rename yourself. And if you can do that, you're either going to see more in the video area, or you're going to see the three dots next to your participant name. If you can please add the acronym or name of your college after your name, it's really helpful when we begin to share with one another to know where folks are coming from. And you can see the examples from myself and my colleagues on the screen there. Appreciate those of you that are already doing that. Sorry, one more technical item that I forgot to mention. I said earlier, but not everyone was on the call. I did take the liberty of muting everyone upon entry to the meeting, but you do all have the power and you can unmute yourselves as you wish. We have a small group today, so we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to share as you'd like to do so, either through the chat or by unmuting and sharing anything you wish verbally. Excellent. Most of you are familiar with the Michigan Center for Student Success, which is housed in Michigan's Community College Association, where we provide state-level support to all 28 public colleges and serve as a hub that connects leadership, administrators, faculty, and staff in their emerging and ongoing efforts to improve student success. That is no different in this work. We're looking to do the same with today's convening and provide some support. Most of you are likely familiar with the initiatives that we have been working on over the last decade or so. Some of those are on the screen before you, and some are missing. We're actually in progress on developing some new logos to add to this slide so that we can truly reflect all of our current work with our great colleges here in Michigan, including the one that we're going to talk about today. So if you've been with us in the previous sessions, you know that our series is about our new programs that are launching in the humanities, liberal arts, and workforce areas, where we're looking to employ these discrete but integrated strategies, where we're talking about program design, building on equity as a centerpiece for all of our work, of course, and working on the ground level with faculty in their programs to enhance teaching and learning, improve equitable and inclusive practices, and certainly keep students on the path, get students on the path, keep them on the path, and then take them through to success. These are exploratory webinars where we have been kind of chunking out all of those different strands of work in different content-rich sessions that are meant to sort of be an overview of these topics, and then with the hope that we will dive a little deeper into some of these topics as our new projects continue. We're calling this the next frontier of guided pathways work in Michigan. Just as a recap, these are the 4 sessions that we've held, and they're all archived with recordings and supporting materials on the mcca.org website. You can click on events and view past events, and you will see all of the recordings and other materials. It says review recorded program from today. It's not there yet. It won't be there until we're done today. But after the fact, you'd have the opportunity to direct link out and find that recording. And the moment you've all been waiting for. This is next frontier of guided pathways work in Michigan. This is the first time I'm having the pleasure to announce our new project, Strengthening My Workforce Pathways, which is focused on 6 career cluster areas represented on the wheel that you see on the screen, and is generously funded by our partners at the Ascendium Education Group. We are very excited to have received a supportive grant from Ascendium in order to bolster our staffing capacity, our ability to bring in support and technical resources, and work forward on 4 discrete strategies that I'll talk through in just a moment. The goal of our project is to focus on 4 strategies: program design, industry recognized credentials, progress into or pathways toward appropriate bachelor's degree programs, and then kind of rounding off our work with supportive, timely advising interventions related specifically to workforce program areas. And you can see the 4 strategies are sort of depicted here on this grid, with the first beginning this summer, then moving into the fall and into next year as we deploy the additional strategies to support the Strengthening My Workforce Pathways project. The very first thing that will happen after today's webinar, of course, which is the final in that exploratory series that preceded these strategy areas beginning, is that you will be hearing from us at the center via email. We will be reaching out to our typical communication channels to invite your college to consider submitting programs to complete a, I don't remember what you guys call the acronym, but it's a workforce scale of adoption assessment. And I'm not good at smushing all those consonants together the way my colleagues can to get a good acronym. But like many of our other projects, you'll have the opportunity to fill out a scale of adoption assessment and then receive some feedback in a phone dialogue and move forward with some customized goal areas based on those SOA results. Those notifications will be coming in the next few weeks. Early June is when we expect to get the materials out for program areas to begin to review and then submit later this summer and begin to commit to that deeper work as we move into the fall. You'll have the opportunity to also commit to the other strategies by program area or by college, depending on how your college is organized. So strategy 2 will focus on embedding and aligning industry recognized credentials in certificate and associate degree program areas. We are hoping to leverage the Michigan Transfer Network and help create a credential database so that students could see what kind of credit awards they could expect to receive for their industry certified credentials, or industry recognized credentials, excuse me. So we're looking forward to that strategy beginning this fall. And strategy 3 is focused on transfer pathways into applied bachelor's degrees. We are beginning to do some exploration around strategy 3 now, but we will more likely develop those relationships and begin to work toward agreements with the associated four-year institutions this fall and beyond. And then next year, we will begin to wrap it all together with some intervention and support for advisors to strengthen advisors' opportunities to give students rich information to help them find their appropriate workforce pathway, of course, stay through it, and then graduate and move forward. I will pause here and ask my colleagues at the center if there's anything further you'd like to add about this new project or these 4 strategies. Excellent. They are shaking their heads no. I will move on then. If you've been with us, you've seen this slide before. We built this project with equity at the center. We did some analysis of some data in workforce programs in Michigan, and unfortunately, as we see across the board, we revealed, or the data revealed, a significant equity gap, particularly related to Black students receiving awards as compared to their white counterparts. So our hope is that we will be able to do some supportive work and assist colleges in also making equity the centerpiece of their work in this project and others that we coordinate at MCSS. You're going to hear some great stuff today. I alluded to this earlier from Achieving the Dream and their colleagues, or their colleague, Stephanie Whalen. I am excited to turn things over to them. I'm really pleased that you'll get to hear more about the toolkit that they have available to colleges and think that you'll find it to be very useful to your work. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and see if there are any questions or comments in the chat. It doesn't appear that they are, but I will take the chance here to stop sharing and give the rights over to John, who is going to take over the sharing.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks so much for having us. Hi, everyone. I'm John Uzzini, Director of Teaching and Learning at Achieving the Dream. It's great to be with you all. I have just dropped a link into the chat for our Teaching and Learning Toolkit that we're really excited to share with you today. We'll be referring to that throughout the session, and hopefully you'll find lots of great resources in there. I'm going to pause, ask my colleague to share a little about herself, and then I'll share more about myself.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Whalen. I'm a chair of the Academy for Teaching Excellence. That means I'm a faculty member on full reassigned time to help to guide and facilitate and create professional development programming for our faculty. And I've been in that position since 2017 and teaching at that college since 2005.
Thank you, Stephanie. And again, I'm John Uzzini. I've been with Achieving the Dream for 5 years now. And before that, I was at Monroe Community College in Rochester, New York. My background is in psychology. I've been a full-time faculty member, an adjunct faculty member, and was leading the Teaching and Learning Center at Monroe for several years before joining ATD. So it's great to be with you all. Our topic for today, as Katie said, is empowering faculty to promote equitable participation in academic and workforce programs. When we say faculty, we're talking about full-time faculty and adjunct faculty, and we'll speak specifically to some of the strategies today and some of the research around engagement of adjunct faculty. Oh, looks like I went on mute there for a second. Was I muted that whole time? Okay. So just a little bit about our network for those of you who are not familiar. We are a national nonprofit organization. We are a network of over 300 colleges, primarily community colleges, but also technical colleges and tribal colleges and universities. We're operating in 40 states and the District of Columbia. And our work ultimately supports about 4 million students. And we do this work as a staff of about 55 people in offices in Washington, D.C. and Portland, Oregon, and with support from nearly 80 part-time coaches who are spread all around the country, some who currently work at our ATD colleges and some who are recently retired. And our mission is to serve these students who we know well at our colleges, who are often the most underserved, to realize substantial value from their post-secondary experience and their earned credentials, thereby strengthening their communities. So where I want to start today is with this quote from our CEO and president, Dr. Karen Stout. This is from a really wonderful lecture that she gave a couple of years ago at NC State. And she said, "Our collective reform efforts have not yielded the desired results. By almost any measure, as community colleges, we are still not meeting our goals, particularly for low-income students and students of color, who now make up most of the students at our nation's community colleges." And what Dr. Stout was saying is all of the reform work we've done now in the field, 10, 15 years out, ATD has been around for 15 years, so much of it has looked at everything except what goes on in the classroom. And in so much of this work, faculty have been left at the margins, not being called on to lead these reform efforts. And that's led, frankly, to a big gap in understanding what it's really going to look like to move the needle around student success. We won't be able to do it without serious attention to what happens in the classroom. Students spend more time with faculty than they do with anyone else. And so while all of the other work is essential, the work about redesigning advising, creating pathways, getting students on a path, it's all essential work. We have to continue to do all of that work really well, but we must also be paying just as much attention to what goes on in the classroom, to the teaching and learning experience. And as I'll share a little more in a little while, and as Stephanie will share, what is critical there to make that work is to design and offer high impact professional development experiences for our full-time faculty and our part-time faculty. So ATD has created this framework, which we call our 4 cornerstones for building a culture of excellence in teaching and learning. And we lay this out in the introduction of the toolkit I shared a few minutes ago. So we're going to walk through each of these 4 cornerstones one at a time, explaining what we mean, sharing some of the research that serves as the foundation for these ideas, and some examples from our colleges, including some in Michigan and also the college where Stephanie is in Illinois. So I'm going to start, and this is again our toolkit, which I linked to just a couple of minutes ago. I'm going to share this first cornerstone to begin. And so here we're focusing on the work of full-time and adjunct faculty and their work in the classroom, learning about evidence-based instructional practices, and then implementing the use of those practices, and ultimately implementing the use of these practices at scale, so that at a college with 100 or 500 or 1,000 faculty, It's not that we have a dozen or 24 faculty using these practices, but rather over time, these practices are picked up by dozens of faculty, hundreds of faculty, so that if you're a student taking any number of courses, if you're a student taking a particular section of a course, there's a high likelihood you're going to be exposed to these evidence-based practices no matter who's teaching that course, whether that's a full-time faculty member or an adjunct faculty member. So when we talk about these evidence-based practices, we're talking about high-impact practices, and we're also talking about some emergent practices for which the research is newer, but still very compelling. I'm going to share in a moment some of the brand new research that's just come out over the last couple of months from the state of Tennessee, but I also want to share about Delta College in Michigan. They've been doing really great work with ATD over the past several years, and as part of an initiative focused on engaging adjunct faculty and student success, they launched a really innovative program to create teaching circles, where faculty members were paired up to coach each other, to learn from each other, to meet together in a recurring way. And a professional learning experience like that has really deep impact on the work faculty do in the classroom. Much greater impact than we see when we offer a workshop here or a workshop there or an occasional brown bag. It's the coming together on a regular basis to push each other as we learn about new practices and then test those practices and then support each other when we run into challenges in our classroom. So when we're talking about these practices, as I said, some of these are the high impact practices that come from the Association of American Colleges and Universities, the AAC&U. High impact practices like the first year experience, learning communities, e-portfolio, capstone experiences, collaborative learning, which I think works remarkably well across both academic and workforce areas. And then we have the emergent practices like open educational resources, accelerated remediation, growth mindset interventions, transparency framework, and adaptive digital learning tools. Across all of these, what we're seeing are active learning approaches that run through the foundation of all these, inclusive and culturally responsive approaches, and others that you see on the right-hand side of the screen here, holistic and constructivist pedagogies, inquiry learning, collaborative learning, and experiential learning. We share a lot of information about all of these in chapter 1 of the toolkit, and I'll show you some screenshots of that in just a moment. But what I really want to emphasize is that these practices work well across all of the different domains we offer our students, the academic disciplines and the workforce areas. And they work equally well because there are common elements that unite all of these approaches. One is that faculty are designing learning experiences where students are actively exploring ideas, asking questions, and solving meaningful problems. The other way these strategies have something really important in common is that students are able to make connections between academic experience and their lived experiences, their community experiences, their cultural backgrounds, their career aspirations. So that's what these strategies have in common. And the evidence for them is really quite significant. So this first bit of research, which we unpack in greater detail again in chapter 1 of the toolkit, is a meta-analysis, which means it's the results of hundreds of similar studies aggregated together. And the researchers here were examining the extent to which active learning strategies really make a difference for students. And they found that when you compare courses where instructors are using active learning or are not using active learning, the faculty who employed active learning showed higher outcomes for all of their students, as measured by exam scores, course pass rates, and so on. And what's especially striking is that these effects are really strong, especially strong for African American students, Latinx students, Native American students. They benefit the most. And so we see reductions in equity gaps by 30 to 45% when instructors are using these active learning strategies. Now, this meta-analysis focused on STEM courses, but there's a lot of research, again, that we share in the toolkit that demonstrates that these effects are consistent across all different academic and workforce areas. We also have, as I said earlier, this brand new research coming out of the state of Tennessee. This was a statewide implementation of high impact practices. And so the data here is drawn from nearly 20,000 students across the state of Tennessee, comparing the outcomes of students who were exposed to these high impact instructional practices with those students who were not. And on all of these important metrics, all the metrics we care about, fall to spring retention, fall to fall retention, the numbers of credits students are earning in their first term, whether they're completing math and English in their first year, across all of these metrics, when students are taking courses where faculty are using these high impact practices, their success rates are increased by statistically significant margins. And when we further compare, this is the same sample of students across Tennessee, when we look at the outcomes of Black students, of Latinx students, and then we look against that at all students, we see again equity gaps on all of these metrics: retention, how many credits students are earning, whether or not they're completing math and English in their first year. Across all of these metrics, equity gaps are closing for students who are part of courses where faculty are using these high impact practices. This is really powerful data. It's from community colleges all across the state of Tennessee. I'm going to share a link to this report a little bit later, but suffice to say, the evidence is clearly very strong at this point for the use of these evidence-based practices. And so we want to support faculty and instructional designers and faculty developers in the use of these practices. And so this is what you'll see in chapter 1 of our toolkit. And throughout the book, there are these resource guides with links that will take you directly to really helpful resources about these different pedagogical strategies, these high impact practices, how to use them, what they're all about, and the evidence for why they're effective. And so if you're using this PDF, these links are active and you can link right to these resources online. And so that's all in chapter 1 of our toolkit. After you explore these resources with your faculty colleagues, there are these tools that come at the end of the chapter. And these are meant to help you sit together and plan for the implementation of these different evidence-based practices across all different areas, academic areas, workforce areas, and so on. So the first worksheet you see here on the left helps you to take an inventory of what faculty are already doing, because we know at most colleges, some number of these practices are already in play, and it helps to know what that looks like. It helps to know who's using them, and it helps to identify these individuals because they can be your experts to help spread the use of these practices at the college. Once you've created that inventory, you can then begin to think about, well, what do we know, for example, about our gateway courses or courses students are taking in their first year? What do we know about where there might be equity gaps in students learning and succeeding in these courses? And then we can pinpoint those courses and say, all right, well, here's where we want to use this evidence-based practice or that evidence-based practice. And so again, these planning tools come up at the end of chapter 1 of the toolkit. So let's shift now to the second cornerstone. And here we're looking at the work faculty do outside of the classroom to support their students around holistic student supports. All right. And so typically this comes in the form of collaboration with colleagues working in student services and student affairs. And we know that in many cases, we have silos at our institutions, and faculty are often not very well informed about these student supports. That's especially a problem for adjunct faculty, as we'll see in a moment. So we really want to dig in here, and I use this great example from the author Paul Tough in his really wonderful book, just came out in fall 2019, The Years That Matter Most, How College Makes or Breaks Us. And Tough says, academic pressures conflate with financial and psychological pressures, and they become impossible for students to disentangle. When you're socially isolated and worried about money and struggling in all your classes, it doesn't feel like 3 distinct problems. It feels like one big problem. Now, it's interesting. This was written before the pandemic, but I think it was relevant then. It's especially relevant now when we think about what our students are experiencing and what they need from us at our institutions. And the problem, I think we all know, is that students are experiencing these problems in this way, but we're offering them supports as if these problems are all separate, as if they're not related. And so we're sending students all around to different offices across campus, and faculty may not be entirely familiar with what each office can offer students and in what way. So I think it really speaks to the need for us to come together and support students in a way that's more integrated. So a couple of really great examples here. One comes from Mott Community College. They're engaged in a brand new initiative with Achieving the Dream to strengthen the pipeline from K through 12 into community college and then on to workforce. We chose 4 communities across the country. In each of those communities, there's an Achieving the Dream college like Mott that is responsible for hosting, for designing, and facilitating a professional learning community that will bring together high school educators, community college educators, and representatives from local employers and workforce development agencies. And they will work together over the next year and a half with us to align pathways in their communities. So Mott is the one great example we have from Michigan. The other communities involved in the project are Tyler Junior College in Texas, Tallahassee Community College in Florida. And I apologize, the 4th one just completely escaped me and I'm embarrassed. I'm sure it will come back to me in a moment. The other example that I want to share is Northeast Wisconsin Community College and their great work on faculty engagement and early alert, which was the focus of a really excellent case study that was published recently. I share this example because Northeast Wisconsin understood from the beginning the need not just to explain to faculty how to use an early alert system like Starfish, but to engage faculty in the design of how folks were going to use this approach and how to deploy it and how to share those resources with their colleagues. The 4th institution in that initiative I just shared is Cuyahoga Community College in Cleveland, Ohio. So this is our second cornerstone, speaking to the need for these collaborations between faculty and student affairs professionals. And to really bring this to life, I want to take us back to the student voice. And I want to share this story from Tuan Nguyen, who is a student at Northeast State Community College. Tuan was one of our Dream Scholars at our 2020 annual conference. Those of you who have been to Dream know that each year we bring 8 to 10 students, really wonderful students from ATD colleges around the country to share their story. And this was part of the story that Tuan shared. He said, being a non-traditional student, I was not expecting the cost when I first came back to school. That first month almost killed me. I was tapped out, completely broke, barely had enough gas to get to school. I would just talk about that in class to a fellow student, and one of my professors overheard the story. And at the end of class, she pulled me aside and asked me how bad my situation was. And she was able to refer me over to student services, where we have a student needs program where they help us with gas, bills, and food to get us by. Tuan continued, without that support, I probably wouldn't have made it past the first month of school. On top of that, it just showed me that the school, the teachers, they actually care about the students. When you feel that sense of care from the school, you reciprocate it back. It becomes a circle where they give to you and you try to give it back to the school. Now, I think that is a powerful story from Tuan, and I hope that many of us could relate a similar story of how we were able to support students. I think the crux of this story, what is so important about it, is that his instructor, the faculty member for that course, was well informed enough about the supports that Northeast State had available to its students that she was able to connect Tuan in a seamless way to the resources he needed. And she was listening, right? So she overheard this conversation and understood that he needed that support, even if he wasn't clear on what to ask for and in what way. So I think it's a great example of the need for us to build these strong collaborations and to keep faculty informed about these supports and to be sure that it's not just full-time faculty who have the information. So this research from the Community College Research Center comes out of a study of 6 Achieving the Dream colleges and an initiative that we worked on together. And Stephanie and her colleagues at Harper were part of that initiative. And they compared full-time faculty and adjunct faculty who were teaching the same courses. They compared student outcomes in those courses. And what was, I think, especially powerful here is that they found no difference in the course outcomes when they compared students taught by full-time faculty versus adjunct faculty taking the same foundational courses. Students were passing at the same rates, they were failing at the same rates, they were withdrawing at the same rates, whether those courses were taught by full-time faculty or adjunct faculty. But there was another finding that is really concerning. And that finding is that the students who were taught by adjunct faculty were less likely to move on to the next course we would expect them to take in the academic sequence. And that was true even for the students who were successful in that first course. So this does not suggest that adjunct faculty are lesser teachers. What it suggests is that they do not have the information they need from their institution to have effective informal advising conversations with their students and to connect their students to needed resources. When they have access to that information, then this gap goes away. But the problem is that most adjunct faculty are not given that critical information. And we know that a lot of students are taking a lot of courses with adjunct faculty. So this is not meant to criticize adjunct faculty. It's meant to critique the institutional processes we have that I think are unintentionally disadvantaging the students who are taking their courses, especially their first year courses with adjunct faculty. So what can we do about that? Well, at the end of chapter 2 of this toolkit, you'll find 3 really important tools. One to help you for planning on how to engage faculty in informal and formal student advising. You'll find a second tool to support faculty in supporting their students beyond the classroom. So this is a planning tool to help you think about how to engage faculty, not just in advising, but in the provision of emergency aid, in financial planning, and childcare supports. The idea is not that faculty are responsible for delivering these supports. They're meant to be knowledgeable about them so that they can connect students to them and explain what these resources are all about. And this works especially well when faculty bring representatives from the offices on campus that administer these supports, and they bring representatives, when they bring their colleagues right into their classroom during the first week of the semester, so that these representatives can explain directly to faculty directly to students what these supports are all about, then it destigmatizes the use of these supports for students. It normalizes the use of these supports. And we know that that's really critical. Finally, the last tool in that chapter 2 is on identifying opportunities for partnerships and collaboration between full-time faculty, adjunct faculty, and colleagues in student services or student affairs. So those are our first 2 cornerstones. Our third and fourth cornerstones really focus on the professional development, the professional learning opportunities that we need to provide faculty so that they can do really great work around those first 2 cornerstones. So we're talking about professional learning to support the use of those evidence-based practices that we talked about in cornerstone 1. And we're talking about professional learning to support these collaborative partnerships that we talked about in cornerstone 2. So we know that professional learning is vital, and that's why I've asked Stephanie to join me, and she's going to share in just a couple of minutes a case study from her work at Harper. But we have significant research in the same way that we have significant research about the impact of those pedagogical practices on student learning. We also have research on the impact of these professional learning processes on faculty learning and on the work faculty do in their classrooms. We know that improved student learning depends on faculty learning and on faculty constantly evolving their practice. And the research clearly shows, research from the past 10 years now, that when faculty are engaged in well-designed, well-resourced, carefully thought out professional learning experiences, where they come together on a regular basis and really push each other's thinking around their teaching, around their classroom practice, then it really makes a positive difference in student learning and student success. The bottom line is that high impact professional development is key to advancing equity. And that's true in the academic programs and the workforce programs. The research is clear that when we offer professional learning, when we really invest in it and we're thoughtful about it, it helps faculty learn and adapt new approaches to their courses. It supports faculty as they test new approaches, and it helps us to advance change at scale. So as I said earlier, we don't want this to be about a dozen or 24 faculty scattered around a college. We want this to be about change at scale. So I'm going to ask Stephanie to come on and share about Harper's really amazing work. While she's talking, I will paste a link into the chat for the website for the Academy for Teaching Excellence at Harper College. They do a lot of great work, including work on communities of practice. I've asked Stephanie to share specifically about a really innovative program they have called Small Group Instructional Feedback. But I want to point you also to the other great work they're doing. And so I will share a link in the chat while Stephanie is presenting. Thank you.
Thanks, John. So anytime someone asks us to talk about what we're doing at Harper, I almost always embrace that opportunity unless we have a conflict, because it pushes us to reflect on what we've been doing and how it's been going. So this was a great opportunity to think about, how we first learned about SGIF and then the approach we took to implement that idea. And I think we, in our reflection, learned that this is a process we'd like to repeat with some of the other initiatives that John has mentioned today. So these are the phases of development that we went through. First, we had heard a lot about small group instructional feedback and seen some of the literature. So we first wanted to form an exploratory subgroup of our faculty development committee so that we could get outside of our center some more faculty to come and explore this with us. So we spent about a semester doing that. We reviewed the relevant literature and examples from other colleges. I believe we had a phone consultation with John to learn more from him. And then we formed an initial pilot. And in that initial pilot, we actually shoulder tapped people from across disciplines who, were pretty eager to learn and try something like this. So we had a really captive audience for learning about the process. And we did some workshop planning and had a workshop for those folks. And we developed a protocol based on slight adaptations of the protocols that we had seen. And we developed guides, which included forms that the faculty would use throughout the process to just kind of make sure they didn't forget any of the important steps. Then after that initial pilot, we had a pretty robust survey for both the faculty and the students involved before we offered the program to all faculty. So now we've had it since 2019 as a regular workshop. And we also have small group instructional feedback as a service with trained facilitators who were in that initial pilot group and had experienced it, several times with a partner. So one of the things that we did was we started with, who's doing this. So we looked at, the models from University of Washington, and we saw that our faculty would really embrace this because it was voluntary and non-evaluative, and that allowed faculty to get feedback from students on their experiences midway through the semester instead of waiting to the end of the semester when we do our student opinion areas of instruction. So that was going to be really important, which of course requires quite a bit of planning to make sure you build that into your syllabus. So in SGIF, in almost all the models we've seen, a faculty peer comes into a colleague's classroom and does what you would almost think of as a real guided focus group. So first, students respond to a survey questions individually, then they work in small groups and gather some consensus, and then the whole class sort of gathers consensus from there. So the facilitator sort of needs a lot of coaching and practice, and like I said, that form. Specific questions varied from different schools we looked at, so we could see that you could kind of adjust to what you think would work for you. And then what was equally important was the faculty peers meeting after this experience, not only to share the written report from the faculty colleague, but to talk it through. And we did some little coaching on, listening and giving feedback, and instead of leading with your own ideas, allowing your colleagues to come up with their own ideas. So the debrief meeting was just important as the rest of it. So we also wanted to make sure we were using an evidence-based approach, which I know John mentioned earlier. So, we kind of, before we got started, again, took a look at that literature to support that students would have a greater satisfaction because we cared, right? So he talked about, those affective and supportive type considerations. And we also saw that students themselves would make positive changes in their learning behaviors because one of the questions asked them to think about what they could do. It allowed faculty to inform changes that they made to the course rather than just sort of try to guess what would make something better. And then students felt more motivated. So when we did that initial pilot in fall 2019, again, it was important to really recruit some people who would want to pay careful attention to that literature and come to it with an open mind about following the process the way that we had designed it, rather than what we sometimes do when we do things quickly, which is everybody kind of does their own thing. We wanted to see how it would work. So we got a small group of faculty. So there was 4 partners, 8 faculty total. And totally 143 students took part at that time. So when we sent out the survey, of course, all the faculty were eager to respond about their experience, but we also got 100 students, which isn't bad when there wasn't really any incentive other than please do this for us. So it kind of showed that they felt pretty good about what they had experienced too, and they wanted to talk about it. So, one of the students said it was a great way to voice concerns and have the instructor listen and make adjustments. And then another student talked about just feeling more comfortable to ask questions and be engaged with understanding the learning experience that the instructor had designed as well. So here's the protocol that we adopted. It was initially that partner, the facilitator, and the instructor should have a consultation meeting and kind of talk a little about the class and what they're interested in learning about. Is more of a kind of reflection, where am I? Then in the in-class session, it's really just the same questions repeated in the individual survey and then small group and then whole group. What helps your learning? What hinders your learning or makes it difficult? What could the instructor do to help your learning in the course? And then what could you do? And then after that, the facilitator creates a report and actually throws away those individual student surveys and the small group sheets and doesn't give those to the instructor because that also telling the students that also allows the students to feel really open and be able to share a lot of details, especially knowing that this isn't going to come back around and hurt me since it is in the middle of the course. So that's total confidentiality. The partner ends up creating a report based on that last conversation about consensus and getting more detail and understanding from the students. So that facilitator instructor debriefing is a really important part of talking through that to make sure the instructor whose class was surveyed really understands. And then lastly, there's a follow-up discussion where the faculty member comes back and explains to students the summary, as well as here are some things I can do, here are some things that I'm not really going to change, but here's how I can explain them to you better so you understand why I've designed the learning process that way, which I think turned out to be just as important as making changes, is just helping to make clear what the learning experience is and how to engage in it successfully for students. So here's what the students said. SGIF favorably impacted their perception of the learning environment, how the course is organized, understanding the value of the assignments, and how to do them, preparing for class, understanding tests, learning the course material, feeling comfortable in building that rapport with the instructor, and feeling motivated to excel. And that's after we had done a second round and we had 214 student respondents. So our faculty were really enthusiastic as well. And I can vouch because I always participated with the faculty member when there was an odd number. I learned more things about my class and things that I just never expected to learn. Sorry. One of the instructors from chemistry talked about it really gives the students that metacognitive opportunity to think about their own learning. And another faculty from math just again reinforced that value of doing this during the course instead of at the end. Here are some details from the survey. I just having the effect of talking a lot really fast, I guess. Hold on one second. All right, so one of the things you'll notice here is um, some of the things that the class and the instructor did. Well, clarifying turned out again to be just as important as making changes. So even though we kind of thought that this would be something that informed changes that we made, I know John talked about, constantly evolving our teaching and that being really important. What we realized that connects to that literature on the transparency framework, which I think John mentioned earlier too, the transparency in learning and teaching. Um, a lot of times, what we really need to do is make clear the purpose of an assignment, the tasks and individual steps it takes to get that assignment done. So, how you can engage, and then how it's going to be graded. So, a lot of conversations came up about those aspects. So I see a really strong connection here to the transparency framework too, for those of you who are interested in considering that. And then we also saw that students thought a lot more about what they could be doing. And I think a lot of our students are feeling really stuck right now and knowing how to engage, especially with all the remote learning. So it really helped them to think about what the learning experience was supposed to entail, and then what they could do to be more actively engaged in that as well. So I think that that fourth question, what students could do, was really important. And I think at one point we even thought, like, do we need that? If we run out of time, is that one we could just lop off? So I would emphatically say no, don't lop it off, because it turned out to be really important. And this does take a little more time than we thought. I think originally we thought a 30-minute experience in the classroom would allow the facilitator to get through all the steps. And a lot of times it turned out that you needed a little 10-minute cushion, so more like 40 minutes. But I would say definitely don't cut short that last question. Well, we liked it so much that when we went to all remote learning, we had to figure out a way to adapt it online. And we had seen a couple of different ways that people were doing that at conferences before the pandemic. So we were considering doing that anyway, but obviously we had a reason to get going on that right away. So we did basically revised the protocol, made a new webinar, and then had faculty launching it again with a partner, with an online survey that again the partner would comb through and create the report, so that it still resulted in faculty meeting together beforehand, students knowing that it would still be confidential and that the faculty member wouldn't see the original responses to the survey, but only a report. And then that post conference where the faculty members talked to one another and really processed what they were learning. So that's what's different. I know we always do our student opinion areas of instruction, and maybe even your participation in that has gone down since most schools have gone to online versions of that. I know ours has, but in this case, you're really getting more data and having a chance to process more data. So it's so much more meaningful than what we get in our student opinion areas of instruction after a course is over. And then lastly, we also adapted this for our faculty retreat. We do a biannual needs assessment. So we decided, why not model the small group instructional feedback experience to the faculty and take a half hour to do an activity with them. So we allowed them to complete the individual survey ahead of time if they wanted to, or right then. Then we put them in breakout groups with a trained facilitator. And then we actually used a Padlet so that the faculty could type responses, since there were so many people in the groups, and then they could like each other's. And that way we could see which ones kind of rose up to the top. And that's how we built consensus. So the facilitator was talking, but people were also participating in the Padlet, turning on their mics and talking as well. So now we have so much data to go through, because we've had somewhere around 150 faculty fill out that survey. And then we have all the data from the breakout groups and the Padlets as well. So we're just starting to theme that. So it's a little bit more labor intensive than maybe some other methods, but it got some real deep qualitative responses for us to work with. So our greatest takeaway, and again, this is just from reflecting by making this presentation for today, is that was one of our most successful implementation, because we slowed down and we took our time. And we put a group together that wasn't just our teaching and learning center staff. There are 11 of us. We brought in some other people because obviously they have some different perspectives. We took time to look at the literature, adapt it to do it our way, to pilot it with people we shoulder tapped, to assess it, and to really make sure we had a quality experience fully equipped with a guide and forms for faculty to fill out as they did it. And then we liked it so much that again, we adapted it for 2 other uses. So we're going to continue to offer those regularly. And I think if we were to continue to think about the post discussions, we might add some literature about um, how learning works. There's a book out there, How Learning Works, that talks about increasing students' perceived value of assignments in order to increase their motivation. So that's something that we've really been looking at, finding ways how to do that. And SGIF helped students become more aware of the purpose and value of some of these activities. But then they also needed a roadmap for how to do things that they didn't understand too, right? So this helped us with that. So I think we would also maybe add some resources for the post discussions about the transparency framework as well. So thanks for having us talk about this today, because it's allowed us to really reflect on why was this such a successful implementation and how was it different maybe than some of the other things that we might have rushed through.
Thank you, Stephanie. So let me just ask before I move us on, what questions people have specifically for Stephanie about what she shared from Harper College. Feel free, we're a small group, so feel free to unmute and share your questions or your thoughts.
Stephanie, I'm wondering, can you clarify, did you do this, the scale of this? So was it all faculty? I may have missed this a little bit at the beginning, but all faculty, some sections, all sections. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, you make an excellent point with your question. As of right now, we just continue to offer it every semester as a couple of times as a workshop that people can come and be partnered up, usually with a disciplinary stranger. And so our numbers of people who are trained and are using it keep increasing. But one of the ways that we tried to help bring more attention to it was having that modeled experience at our faculty retreat. So we're hoping to continue to increase participation, but it hasn't been something that we've really, brought to full scale. So that's something we should think about.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, and my question was going to be about that too, like what kind of communication mechanisms maybe you have already employed or you might plan to do next as you try to pull more faculty members in. Just curious what you've thought about or talked about.
Well, our usual go-tos are we have an academy newsletter and obviously our professional development offerings, emails that go out and things like that. We also created a video about it with faculty giving some testimonials that we thought was very helpful. And now again, like I mentioned, because I think we had it at the faculty retreat, we'll get some more people doing it. And perhaps someday it's something that we could, faculty could choose between this or the SOI, or maybe some point it could be more formalized so that we could go to scale. But glad you asked that question, because it's not something that we've thought a lot about. We've just sort of allowed people to want to come and do it, but maybe it's something we should look at, because we do have very low rates for SOIs since it went to an all online format, abysmal. So only the faculty who are sort of creating class time or giving some kind of incentive are really getting high rates with their SOIs.
Interesting. Yeah. And I was asking partially because some of the comments in the chat before were about lack of awareness from particularly adjunct members of faculty bodies, and just sometimes you don't know what you don't know on the campus, right? So if people don't know it's available, I know that's something our colleges sometimes bring up is how do we let people know? How do we make them aware of these opportunities?
And I think our approach right now is to build quality programming and let it go for a while so that we build a body of faculty who really support it and believe in it. And then let's see if that means we could start talking about scaling it in a different way than we normally would. And so we're really trying to build in some longevity with what we do. Cause I think we're always, picking up on trends and looking to new great things, but we're trying to slow it down and do it broader capacity instead of doing so much so quickly and having it kind of be a thing you can do and then it goes away. So we're changing our thinking about that too.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sorry about my throat. Now I know why my grandmother always had a lozenge on Sundays when we sang at church, because her voice was doing that. And it's just now, this is my first go around. So from now on, I'll have my little thing of lozenges as well.
No worries. It
It's
was
all
great.
good, Stephanie. So I think, I really wanted Stephanie to share, and I'm so glad that she was able to, because that example that comes out of Harper College and a lot of the other work they do there in their Academy for Teaching Excellence, these are such great examples of what we look for, the conditions at colleges that are doing work well around Cornerstone 3. And those examples from Harper, I think, are especially strong. The last thing I want to share, and then we're going to move into an activity, is the fourth cornerstone. And so here we're looking at what the institution does to support faculty by really reinforcing the importance of professional learning in policies and practices, in how faculty are evaluated and faculty position descriptions. And so one way to think about this is how adjunct faculty are supported with something as simple as a new faculty orientation. So this finding right here comes from the same work that the Community College Research Center did with us with the 6 ATD colleges in our initiative on engaging adjunct faculty. And here they were comparing adjunct faculty who did or did not participate in a new faculty orientation. And what they found across the board was that the adjunct faculty who had been to a new faculty orientation, that's the green bars there, reported being somewhat to very knowledgeable about all of these key student supports. So this gets back to the gap I spoke about earlier. For adjunct faculty who do not have access to this information, that ultimately has a negative impact on the success of their students. And so it's meaningful that just a simple orientation once or twice a year can really make a difference in the sharing of information and the support for adjunct faculty that ultimately translates into support for their students. So I will share the link for this report as well when we finish the presentation. What I'm going to do now is turn us to an activity, and I'm going to put a worksheet into the chat, and then I'll share the prompts. But essentially, this is a self-assessment activity for you to think about the ways in which your college has established what we think of as a culture of teaching and learning excellence. Interesting. For some reason, it's not showing up in the chat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and show you the document. Okay. And we'll share this as an attachment. This is, can everyone see this okay? Okay. So this is 10 items, and it's modified from a worksheet that's in the Teaching and Learning Toolkit. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is just take the next few minutes and just make some notes for yourself about where you would score your institution on each of these, where 1 is completely false and 5 is completely true. I've just put a link to the worksheet. I don't know why that wasn't working earlier, but you can go to the worksheet in a separate tab on your computer so that you can see it. And in just a couple of minutes, I'm going to ask for Katie to send folks into small groups. We're going to do groups of 3. And when you open that worksheet, you'll see prompts for individual reflection and then some group discussion. And we'll take about 15 minutes in those groups. Let's just take a couple more minutes right now to answer the rest of these 10 questions. If you've answered all 10, please open the document using the link that I've just shared, and you'll see at the bottom of the page some prompts for individual reflection. We're going to go into those breakouts. When you get into your breakout room, assuming that you may not know the other folks in your room, please do a quick round of introductions, and then you might share a little bit about your answers to the diagnostic here, to the self-assessment. But what we're particularly interested in having you share is, where do you think your campus is strong? And where do you think there might be a need for improvement? And looking across the different colleges represented in your small group, what patterns do you notice? and what similarities or differences emerge, and where do you see common areas of need. We're going to go into these breakout rooms for 15 minutes. So there's a good amount of time there. Since there's small groups, everyone should have a turn for sharing. Please, take that time to engage with each other, and we will look forward to hearing as we come back together in a full group about what was shared. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. If you could just add a thought into the chat so we can hear a little bit about how your discussions went. Thinking about the other folks you got to talk to in your small group. What patterns did you see in the responses? Where were there shared strengths? Where were there maybe shared areas for improvement? Maybe there were common areas of need. If you can share those in the chat, or given that we're a small group, feel free to unmute and just share yourself verbally. That's great too. Darby says, sustained engagement for adjunct faculty. Erica said, interest in learning more about sustained adjunct faculty development opportunities. Yes, definitely.
You guys must have been in the same group.
Jenny, you got some excellent feedback on how the Student Success Center can better engage and support faculty in the work. That's excellent.
Oops, especially around the idea of how to communicate and get faculty to come to things, kind of coming at it both levels, communicating with the president and chancellor so they're aware, and then also thinking about that dean or CAO who might send a special email to a faculty member or a group of faculty members that says you might particularly be interested in this. So I think that will help us as we message out to the people that we are able to message to, how they can message more effectively to their faculties.
Engaging culture change among longtime faculty for active teaching methodologies. I feel like we were talking a little bit about that back here in the main room while folks were off in the small groups, and how sometimes when you're creating supports around these kinds of innovations, you are immediately going to engage, the choir, and we know the choir needs practice, so that's not a bad thing, but the choir may be a relatively small percent of your faculty. There may be some very vocal folks who are, opposed to the idea of this particular, innovation. But what often gets forgotten is there's a lot of people in the middle who are not necessarily, overtly antagonistic to the changes you're trying to bring about. They just maybe haven't totally understood them yet or embraced them yet. And so they're really there waiting to be engaged, and waiting to be, I think, met where they are, in the same way we talk about meeting our students where we are. So I wouldn't forget about them, because they probably represent the largest percentage of faculty, both full-time and part-time faculty, across the academic programs and the workforce programs. I'm going to put into the chat a link to another ATD resource. This is a practitioner's guide on engaging adjunct faculty in the student success movement. There's a lot of great information in there. And similar to the ATD Teaching and Learning Toolkit, some planning templates and worksheets. And also in the Teaching and Learning Toolkit that I shared at the beginning of our session, there's a lot of good material about support for adjunct faculty, engagement of adjunct faculty. So we have just a couple minutes left, and so I want to close with bringing the student voice back into this. This is a quote from a student at an ATD college, Oakton Community College. His name is Joshua Rodriguez, and he was interviewed as part of a book that came out in fall 2020 called Relationship Rich Education: How Human Connections Drive Success in College. If you were at our DREAM conference virtually this past February, one of the co-authors, Peter Felton, spoke as part of our teaching and learning plenary session at DREAM and gave a really powerful talk. And throughout this book, there are really wonderful quotes from students and faculty and administrators at colleges and universities across the country, speaking to the power of relationships. So here's the quote from Joshua. Early in Calculus 2, we started getting into really difficult things, and I suddenly began having these feelings like I didn't belong in this class, that my education, what I was trying to achieve, wasn't possible. I went to Professor Arco to say that I might have to drop out. And he told me, Joshua, I don't want you to do the homework tonight. I want you to look up imposter syndrome and then come talk with me. I did that, and I learned that it is extraordinarily common among students. That interaction bolstered my confidence to realize that I'm not alone in this, that everyone has these feelings. I went from contemplating dropping out to getting tutoring help and then getting an A in the course. I think that's a remarkable and powerful quote from Joshua about the impact that faculty can have, full-time faculty and adjunct faculty, if we are supporting our colleagues, if institutions are giving faculty the time and the space they need to do this work, which is very difficult work. But there's a lot of room for us to be innovative and to continue to grow and develop as educators in our work. So I want to leave you there with the power of the student voice to keep us grounded in why we do this work. I want to thank you. My email address is here. Stephanie's email address is here as well. I want to thank Stephanie for her great case study that she shared today from Harper College. We encourage you to be in touch with us, however we can be helpful. And I want to thank the folks at the Center for Student Success for bringing us in to share today. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us on a beautiful Friday afternoon. Hopefully it's beautiful where you are and you get to enjoy some sunshine today. We will be back in touch with all of you soon, including our new friend Stephanie and John from ATD, as we get further into our Strengthening My Workforce Programs project. We would love the opportunity to partner with all of you further. Have a great day, everybody.